Um, well, okay, to understand virtual reality, we should start with the physical world, which is where you are right now, right? And it's, the physical world is actually a pretty mysterious thing. It's the thing on the other side of your sense organs, and it serves as the medium between people. It's also this very stubborn thing that's always there. All three of those make it a rather odd creature to me, but there it is, undeniable. And what virtual reality is it fills the role normally taken by physical reality as the medium of an objective reality between people, and it does it by putting computerized clothing on the outside of your sense organs, directly covering their surface. So right now, there's two pieces of clothing in the display today, which are the two most important ones, although there are others too, which I might talk about a bit. There's a special kind of goggle that one wears, and my company's goggle is called the iPhone, and the generic term is head-mounted display. And what that does, as you'll see, is it creates a wide-angle image in front of each eye that the wider the better, and right now we're out fairly wide. We need to be wider in the future. It's a stereo color image so that you feel yourself to be inside the display instead of looking at an external thing. The key is that by creating stimulation right at the surface of the sense organ, you change something from being a display to simply being your external reality. And if it's a pretty general purpose display, you have a fairly general purpose tool for creating external realities. There's a simple trick used in head-mounted displays, which is that the images that you see, that you feel yourself to be inside of, are not pre-created animations. Rather, they're images that are generated on the fly in real time. The entire world is repainted every 20th of a second, one hopes. Sometimes you run a bit slower. But anyway, it's repainted constantly, and it's driven by the motion of your head. If you look to the left, the world you're in shifts to the right to compensate for your head movement. And by always compensating for your head movement, it creates this illusion that you're moving freely around inside an external reality that's staying put, okay? Which is exactly the relationship you have with the physical world. So you can notice that process when you're trying out the system. The other article of clothing that you'll put on is a data glove, which is a glove you put on, and then you can hold up your hand in front of your face and see a computer version of your hand. You can pick up objects, and eventually you'll be able to feel them, which is something we can do in-house, but we're not shipping yet. And we can do to a limited degree. And so that recreates the relationship of your hand to the physical world and the virtual world. Another thing we don't have today is sound, where you just have earphones and you have sound that also sounds like it's coming from the right direction and turns when your head turns to create the illusion that it's standing still, the same sort of idea. And a variety of other things. We have an option of a full body suit, so you can have a total immersion experience. And but right now we're just doing a glove and an iPhone because it's very convenient, and your head and your hand are the most critical parts of you for interacting with the physical world. So that does the trick. Now, so what do we have here? We have here sort of the first general input and output device for human beings. You might think of it that way, but I think it's much more than that. When there's just one person wearing these clothes, which is the case today in our demonstration here, you have essentially a personal fantasy machine. The thing about it is that, like a dream or like a daydream or a fantasy, it's something that you have by yourself and there aren't other people in it. It's a private world. Now, the magic really happens, the thing that makes this thing take off and go to uncharted territory, is that you can connect up multiple people in it. Okay? Now, what happens when you do this is you might have a few people in the physical world here on Earth. They might be on opposite coasts. They might be anywhere. But in the virtual world, they're in the same space. If they look at each other, they see computer versions of their faces and their hands. And they can do things together. They can play ball. They can dance. They can play sports. You've recreated the relationship that people have with one another in the physical world. But with a critical difference, and that difference is that in the virtual world, there's no specific content. The content is completely open, as it is in dreams. Now, that combination of having the same level of objectivity you have in the physical world with the same level of openness and infinite imagination that you can find in dreams. And then the composability that you associate with art, of being able to build things, that combination of elements has never existed before. And it's an extraordinary phenomenon, I think, because what it does is it opens up the possibility for an entirely new channel of communication between people. And I have a name for that, and it's maybe an overly dry name, and we need a better one, I think. But I call it post-symbolic communication. And what that means, very simply, is that if you consider the way we reach each other in the physical world, there's this problem with the physical world. The physical world is wonderful in that it has nature in it, and it's an infinite mystery and beauty, and it has this this level of subtlety and change that will never happen in virtual reality. There's one problem with it, which is that it's very resistant to us. We're very limited in our power in it. And what I mean by that is, let's say we're all in this room. I cannot make this room into a rose all of a sudden, into a giant rose where we're all sitting on the pedal. It's simply impossible. I cannot make that happen. I can say it, but I can't actually create this giant rose instantly on the spot right here in the physical world. And that's the root, I think, of a fundamental trauma that most of us have forgotten. I think when we were all little kids, you know, when you're born into the world and you have this incredible infinite imagination inside your head, and then you gradually discover very traumatically and with great pain that you're actually this physical creature in this physical world, and that your parents and other people can only be reached through it, and food can only be reached through the physical world. And in that physical world, you're very weak. You're really powerless. And you can't just get what you want. You can't express what you feel inside. You can't make your imagination real. And there's a trick that we use to get around it, and it's called symbols. What we've discovered, what each of us discovers anew in our childhood, is that there's a small part of the physical world that we can move as fast as we feel and think. And that's what we call our body. And in particular, it's what we call our mouths and our eyes and so forth, the parts that we use to contact other people. And if we do things with the part of the world that we can move fast enough, then we can do this trick where those movements of the tongue and of the hand refer to the rest of the world that we can't move. And that's the origin of words and pictures and all of these other forms of symbols. Symbols are really a technique for speed. And, well, virtual reality breaks through this. In virtual reality, you have a new kind of reality that has the same level of objective sharing as the physical world, whatever that might be. That's kind of mysterious, but whatever it is, we recreate it. And in this new type of objective reality, you can actually change the reality quickly. So you have this possibility of directly creating dreams with other people that are shared, that are fully real, something I call a reality conversation. Now, you might ask, well, how do you do it? And let me explain that. When you're inside virtual reality, you can pick up objects that you find, and they act like physical objects, except they can have greater power. So some of the objects that are lying around will turn out to be tools that you can use to construct and build the reality in various ways. And if you use those well enough, you can use tools to make new tools, and they'll evolve, and they'll get better. And you'll have something like an extraordinary three-dimensional hypercard thing that you can use to change the world. And the types of tools that are possible are really extraordinary. My model for these is musical instruments. I think of musical instruments as being the most eloquent tools that have ever been built. And we're trying to use that as a source of inspiration for what it might be like to pick up a thing that connects to the world in interesting ways, that a device that through subtle manipulation you can build buildings and mountain ranges and all sorts of things quickly. And I believe in that model. It's slow coming. Already, though, our tools are pretty good. Right now, we design our worlds mostly on a Macintosh, and we can typically do a new world in under an hour, like a rough cut of it. And that's very good. The world you're going to see today, is a whimsical world, and whimsical worlds are the easiest, I should point out, because if you have a world that's supposed to accomplish something, like show a chemist molecules and how they interact or something like that, that's much harder because you have to be accurate, you have to do all this simulation. But if you're just doing a whimsical world, it can go very quickly. The world that that you're going to see today, or any of you have tried, was done the night before last, between about midnight and 1:30, for the most part. And if anybody, I don't know if I'll have time because I have to take off about noon, unfortunately, but I might be able to show you some of the visual programming stuff on the screen that we use to make worlds. And it's already very improvisatory and very quick, and it's really, it's getting there. So what to say? We have here a new medium of communication, a new tool. I should mention, in the very short term, the practical uses of virtual reality. I'll just list a series of them, and perhaps more will come up in the questions. It's already being used by architects to preview buildings before they're built. It's frequently used as a sales tool more than as a design tool at this stage, where an architect will show a client, well, here's the building we want to build, and here's the view from your desk, and isn't it marvelous, and here's the checkbook. And that's one use of it. Another use of it is in medical imagery and surgical planning. The system is directly connected to medical scanning machines, so a patient can be scanned in, and an hour later a doctor can be picking up their bones and internal organs and trying to figure out what the best method of planning an operation is. I should mention, with all the medical applications, very early, it takes years for something to become practical in that arena, so that we should have a dose of realism about that it's all very early experiments. Another fascinating one in medicine is using it as a tool for therapy with people who have movement impairments. For instance, if you imagine say 5 years from now, a child who isn't able to walk might be able to go into virtual reality and learn to control a human body that has feet and run around and play ball with other kids in virtual reality. Or for that matter, they might become a bird or something. And the reasons for doing that are, well, there's two big ones. One is because socially it could be a nice thing for kids to be able to do that. It opens up a lot of channels of communication they might not otherwise have. Another important one is the potential of therapy that might keep some parts of the brain awake that would atrophy otherwise. And that's entirely speculative, but whether it turns out to work or not will be interesting information. Now, what I just mentioned, this idea of being able to change your body, that deserves some mention. One of the reasons that the experience of virtual reality is so fascinating is because you experience yourself in an amazing way when you're inside virtual reality. Most technology leads, I think, it tends towards a state of mind where you tend to think of the world from an external perspective. For instance, when you use computers, you're always having to quantify and define information in order for a computer to be able to handle it. So you're taking this very external view and not really an experiential one. But virtual reality is just the opposite. It forces you to be experiential because there you are perceiving it, your body's gone, and like, what's going on? I mean, that's you. You really like notice your own consciousness, and that's one of the sort of amazing things about it. But then you of course have to create some body in virtual reality. And there's this interesting question, well, what does your body look like? You can make it look human, and that's what we've done in this world. If you look at the hand, it's a fairly human hand, obviously with compromises because today's computers can't really do a hand that looks real, but it's, that's the general idea. But you can also become animals. I mean, we become wild creatures, if you will, sometimes, lobsters and all sorts of things. And what's interesting about that is that it turns out that people can take on a self-image of a very different body very easily. And I find that very surprising, including things like adding extra limbs. We have a technique where we add extra limbs, and an overall global transfer function from some collection of other limbs controls the new limb so that you can sort of learn to control it. And people just take to it very quickly. It's sort of surprising. It's like the shamanic tradition of becoming animals or something. But anyway, that's the principle that I was talking about, and I'm describing the child learning to control a body that can walk or fly or whatever. It's a great tool for scientific visualization. We can do wonderful things with that. I mentioned chemistry. That's one example. It's also, just in general, if you have a bunch of data that's plotted out in 3-space, if you could just walk around it and point to features in the data unambiguously and be in there with your colleagues and talk about it at the same time, it's an astonishing tool. It's really better than a screen. For a lot of applications. There's some things where screen is still better, I think. Another thing that's really good is as a monitor and an editor for complex systems. For instance, with virtual reality, you have this possibility of looking at an entire computer program at once instead of browsing through little windows on it, which is what you have to do with a screen. And it could be visualized as like a giant Christmas tree-like thing that you can climb around on or whatever. The same thing's true for large databases. We're doing one project with insurance data where we have just a ton of data, and the object is to be able to look at it all at once, notice patterns in it easier. Air traffic control is a possibility, all these things. So those are some of today's applications. Where it's going in the future, let's say after the turn of the century, my hope is that it's going to follow the model of the telephone instead of the movie or the computer. And the reason for that is that I think the whole reason it's important is it's a means of communication between people. And the telephone serves as a marvelous precedent of a service that provides communication links between people without affecting the content. And the business of the telephone companies serves as a wonderful model of the way a communication service can help to finance the delivery of the technology to consumers in the early days when it's still expensive. That had to happen with the telephone. It'll have to happen with virtual reality. And so that's my model, and I'm trying to make it happen that way. And it's very nice to have a connection with Pac Bell here because Pac Bell and VPL jointly showed the system for the first time last year. So we've had a link with the telephone companies for a long time, and I hope that the telephone companies will play a critical role in virtual reality in the future. So that's the intro. That's the tape play. And what I'd like to do is open it to questions, and I'm sure we'll go all over the place. The question is, how big a computer do you really need now to do it? And, sorry, to condense. How small a computer can you get away with? All right. Yeah, that's a real good question. That's a matter of some debate right now. There's some people who are advocating as, the smallest, lowest end platform possible, and primarily Autodesk is interested in that direction. And my own opinion is that there's a certain threshold where if it gets beyond that quality, it disappears and it just becomes a reality. And if you're below that threshold, it's like this interface to some 3D data. And it's a very subjective question where that threshold is. It's a very cultural question, which means it'll change every year, and I think in the upward direction. But my own feeling is that the system in the other room is right at the minimum of what's acceptable for real, for users who are not technical, who are just out there. And right now, that system is expensive. However, all the prices are coming down for each component. But judge for yourself. You'll be able to see our system. Some people think that this system is still a bit short of what's needed. Most people, though, I think, can go into this and immediately have an experience and use it. And I don't think that's true with a lesser system. This is a big system. As you can see the hardware, it's all laid out there. There's 2 Silicon Graphics high-end workstations, 210 GTXs, and it's controlled, there's a Macintosh design station, but there's a lot of silicon sitting there, and the hacker's measurement is refrigerators, and there's a complete refrigerator of computer power running that system. Oh, the question is, do we have a problem with motion sickness? Getting seasick is a sign of a virtual reality system that isn't working quite right. Because you see, seasickness is a thing that happens when your inner ear and your eyes and other parts of your body disagree about how your body's moving. And when they disagree, you throw up. And it's kind of a strange. I've often wondered what that's all about, because I have this theory that, well, maybe, long ago when we were some little tadpole or something, there was some creature that was big that used to come along and try to eat us, but before it would eat us, it would pick us up and shake us, and we'd throw up, and it would drop us in disgust, and we'd get away. And whatever its origins, it actually, I think, is going to serve a strangely protective function in the future, which is a lot of times, say, when a person from Hollywood will look at virtual reality, they'll say, oh, great, we'll do these 3D movies, and you'll be in there, and you'll be Zorro or whatever. And fortunately, I think you can't do that because of this seasickness problem. You have to give the person the control of the camera, essentially. If you force them to see a certain thing, they'll throw up. And so I think that this seasickness is going to be the savior of future media in many ways. Right. Okay. The question is, the Wall Street Journal called it an LSD analog on its cover a while ago. Is there anything to that? I would say the writer of that piece apparently is an expert on the subject because I okay. The first thing, I have to claim a certain amount of ignorance in the field because I haven't tried psychedelics myself and I don't know about them from direct experience, but I know many people who have. In fact, everybody else in my generation. I've been sort of the strange person that way for a long time. And my impression is that there really could hardly be two things that were more different in a lot of important ways. Just to go through a couple of them. Well, for one thing, just the obvious thing, virtual reality changes objective experience. Psychedelics change subjective experience. They are on different sides of the skin, you know. And I mean, it seems very obvious, and that's an important, very big difference, okay? So, you know, when you come out of virtual reality, there's this amazing moment where you look at the physical world again, and you notice a lot. I mean, it's a real sensitizing experience. It doesn't take you away from the physical world. It brings you closer to it, I think. So I think it's real different. Yeah, we're doing some work in that regard. I'm sure there's going to be an explosion. Oh, the question is anybody using this to refine self-image and self-control in high-performance tasks such as sports? And well, I'll give you a simple example of something I did a few years ago as a hack, which was I did a simulation of juggling with two gloves. And this actually wasn't with a head-mounted display, but it was just on a screen where the things were in front of me. But anyway, you could slow down time, and if you make time real slow so that the balls fall slow, you have lots of time to get your hand under the balls, and it's very easy to juggle. And so, but then what you do is you gradually speed it up. And as soon as it hits real-world speed, the skill that you've acquired that way is fairly transferable to the physical world. Well, there's still important differences, but there's a lot that transfers. So the general paradigm is you can make a version of something you want to do in virtual reality that's easier and then gradually interpolate between that and the actual practice in the physical world. And that doesn't have to be only in the time domain. We're interested in it in the cognitive domain. For instance, having certain objects that are brighter or easier to see and then gradually fade into commonality with others. Real interested in stroke rehab and other things like that. I think the research is going to come slow because inherently it's a field that has to be done slowly and carefully, and it'll take a long time to define the studies. But we're already, you know, we're working with a few schools and things on the very, very early stages of that kind of work. Okay, virtual reality and sex. This is another one of those stupid questions, I have to say. And I'm sorry, but I mean, I always, you know, there's always somebody in the audience. I always wonder who will be the first person to say, oh, can you have sex in it? Okay, now look. If you're into rubber ducks, all right, I have something for you here today. Okay, I don't know exactly what to say about this. The whole, I mean, human eroticism is a very mysterious thing because it does have an element of particular content, and let's say if that content culturally for a person at a certain time is the naked female form, you can certainly make one of those in virtual reality, and maybe it would be erotic. Somebody wanted one the other day, so I input a goddess sculpture from Minoan, Crete about, I don't know, a week ago, which was a naked goddess holding snakes, but she's very erotic looking, I think, and made her a few hundred feet tall for impact, and there were a few men, you know, flying around her nipples and seemed to like it and all that, but I have to say that, well, I mean, you know, it's almost so absurd it's hard to talk about. You know, in a way, well, okay, the type of imagery we do in virtual reality now, which is this very smooth plasticine-like surface, which is called Gouraud shading, it's a little reminiscent of, say, the Vargas art that you see in Playboy or something, and maybe it's within I mean, I've never seen any limits to human adaptability or perversion or whatever you want to call it, and it's possible, okay? It's possible that somebody could really, you know, do that, but actually, I'm going to use this as a segue to something that's interesting that actually will apply to it. There's a phenomenon in virtual reality which is a little hard to describe, but it's very real, which is that when you're inside virtual reality, all the particular forms that are present are sort of, they don't feel very important. The particular forms at a given point in time become unimportant because they're so easy to change. And that's already true. I mean, the fact that this world has a rubber duck in it, there's nothing special about that rubber duck. I can just press copy and have, 30 of them, or I can change them or whatever. There's nothing special. And that sense of all forms becoming less different from one another, becoming less precious, is a really key part of what virtual reality is. And what replaces that is this very ephemeral, very beautiful, ever-changing thing called creativity. One of the little cliches I say a lot is that creativity is the money of virtual reality, because it's the only thing that can ever be in short supply, because it's a world with infinite resources. So what you have is this situation where the particulars don't matter as much. It's more the changes that you notice. And I'll give you another little example of this. This is a little parable I use sometimes to try to explain the concept. Let's suppose it's like the year 2000, and the Jones bring home their virtual reality clothing for the first time, and they're running around the yard having fun, making up realities, right? And next door, the Smiths are aghast because the Jones, first of all, the Jones are seeing something that they don't. And this is bad. One of the intriguing things about virtual reality is that it's the only medium where you really can't look over somebody's shoulder. You just have to be there and have your own perspective, or you can't experience it. So there's this sort of jealousy and curiosity that plays a factor in people's interest in it. Anyway, so the Smiths are like wondering, why are the Jones sitting in their yard pointing at the Smith's house and laughing? What did they do? What's wrong? And so they go out and get their own clothing to find out. And then they look at their own house and they discover it's been turned into a giant dung pile. Whereas the Joneses' house has been turned into a beautiful crystal castle. So they retaliate and they make their own house into a crystal castle, but they figure, well, it has to be better, so they just make it twice as tall. Well, the Joneses are ready for that one. They make theirs 10 times as tall. And then they have this sort of altitude race until, you can't tell the difference between a million high castle and a billion high castle, billion mile high castle. If you're just tweaking parameters, you can only perceive them so far, and then they're just the same. And so if they're going to keep this competition going, they're absolutely forced to be creative. They have to be. And so creativity becomes real as soon as people have the chance. As soon as people have the chance to actually change the world at will, creativity will become this precious commodity like money. And the only reason it's easy to sort of, I mean, I hear this all the time, oh, people aren't creative, you're an optimist, you're young, whatever. But forget it. I mean, the 20th century is the weird century. There's never been a century before, and there will never be another one again, where people mostly reach each other through one-way media. It's the century where culture was completely transformed and crushed and modulated by this technology at its very early stages before it was ready to do anything. And it's going to be remembered as a weird, weird time. So don't give me any of this stuff about how people aren't creative. Give them a chance first, then tell me. And when they have a chance, they are. Anyway, so to bring this back to the sex question, the issue is that as soon as you can sort of make sexual forms in virtual reality, and those castles that were growing taller could serve as a metaphor in a certain way, if you see what I mean. And as soon as you start doing that, there's going to be the same thing that happened in my parable with the castles, except it's going to break into other forms. There'll be all this creativity, and it'll turn into a totally different sort of thing very quickly. And what you'll really have is something that's, I think, a kind of erotica in a very profound and sort of mystical sense of just creativity in all its forms, just growing and changing. There's just no way that the forms will stay fixed on sort of the human naked form. It'll just grow and change all over the place. And that might sound like sort of an abstract or a strange answer, but I think that that's the truth. And I want to say, I think virtual reality is a medium that sensitizes people to the physical world, so if anything, it'll re-emphasize the specialness of physical world sex. The question is, can you have a blended reality where you have like the physical world with some virtual things present, like just adding a statue here or something that everybody would see, but otherwise it's the physical world? I think it's doable. We have some work in that direction. Long-term project, many obstacles, real hard. It'd be really good. That would be a whole other medium. I think it might happen in the next century. It'd be real cool, I think. Very positive. It'll be slow coming.